Welcome back to the Legendary Nights podcast, season 4, episode 3. This is the tale of Riddick Bowe and Andrew Golota, two of the most craziest and infamous fights in boxing history. And we're really excited to bring this tale to you guys. It's something that may not essentially be remembered as a legendary night, so to speak, but there's certainly many tales behind these fights and the lead up to these fights, and of course in between the first and second fights. And also, we've never really done anything at all on Andrew Golota other than mentioned him in passing in other people's career profiles or Legendary Nights tales. So it is really good to bring Andrew Golota into the fold, as well as do a little bit more with Riddick Bowe. But it is one of those crazy moments in the sport that is forever remembered for its infamy, and we're really excited to go through this story and bring it to you from a completely different perspective.
Yeah, and it is great to bring in Andrew Golota, a guy that I knew of his name, fought Lennox Lewis, etc. And obviously I remember this fight. And he's a guy that I've been a bit fascinated with because he's a bit of an unknown quantity. And to dig into a little bit of his life, as well as obviously going over some stuff that we haven't been through with Riddick Bowe in his previous tale with Evander Holyfield. So, memorable fights, doesn't make them great though, let's put it that way. But they were certainly memorable, and it's a great tale between these two. And it was almost inevitable that they would meet somewhere along the line because of just how crazy their boxing careers were at the very beginning to when they finally met.
Now, we're going to start this tale a little bit differently. We're actually going to begin with Andrew Golota, a fighter we've done literally nothing on before, and then of course integrate Riddick Bowe into the story as we move along the timeline. So we are going to begin when Andrzej Jan Golota was a child growing up rough in Wrocław, Poland, about 150 miles away from Warsaw. His future trainer, Lou Duva, explained that Andrew was an only child. His father, Andrzej, ran a TV repair service, while his mother, Bozina, was a government clerical worker. His father actually committed suicide when Andrew was 5 years old, and his mother had a serious drug and alcohol problem and turned him over to an orphanage in Poland when he was 6 years old. Luckily for Andrew, his aunt got him out of the orphanage, and he went to live with her and his uncle. He never forgot the fact that his mother had just, in his words, given him away. He was raised primarily by his uncle, Sedila, and aunt, Jadwiga, in one of Warsaw's most menacing neighbourhoods. Golota confirmed, "I remember the time I didn't have a father or even a mother. They didn't pay much attention to me, so I was basically raised by an aunt and an uncle and my grandmother." Andrew grew up as a tough street kid who earned himself a fighting reputation with a mean side. Polish reporter Łukasz Bulka explained he was raised in the ghetto part of Warsaw in Poland with a lot of crime going on. He was known to be a street guy. Although his future wife, Mariola Babic, confirmed he grew up in difficult surroundings, she was also eager to squash other reports about his childhood when she said there were some articles written that he was deprived of food when he was a child and that he lived on the streets. But that's not true.
Yeah, Mariola actually explained that there were some hardships, sometimes as a child when he didn't have as much family as he should have, but he always had enough to eat and clothes to wear. And I can tell you that he is not stupid. In a Sports Illustrated article written by Tim Crothers, he actually wrote that Golota described himself in his youth as a bully, thrown out of school regularly, mostly because he was the largest, meanest kid in his class, and he possessed a slight stutter, which didn't help him. So because of his stutter and his size, he actually got into so many fights at school, which resulted in him getting suspended. And again, Tim Crothers called them dozens of unsanctioned after-school bouts. So playground fights, basically, after school. However, all that trouble had led to something positive. Crothers explained that recognising the grit in his 12-year-old nephew, his uncle actually brought Golota to the Liga Boxing Club, which was an elite military training centre for some world-class tutoring in the ring. Golota recalled that most of my family was against my boxing, feeling I should not play such a brutal sport. They were scared that I would get a flat nose. So Lou Duva said that under the centre's rules, he wasn't supposed to be accepted until he was 15 years old. They probably just wanted to get him out of their hair. 3 years later, he won his first of 7 straight national championships. He was so good that sometimes his opponents just defaulted rather than having to face him. So boxing wasn't his complete saviour though. A year later, age 13, he broke the nose of an 18-year-old man and continued to run into trouble with the police. He did keep his discipline enough to reach the 1988 Olympics at 20 years old and already an accomplished amateur boxer. He was on his way to facing Ray Mercer in the gold medal match when he actually got a cut in the semi-final bout and lost. Although disappointed, he still earned a bronze for Poland in the heavyweight class.
If you thought that Andrew had things pretty tough, well, Riddick Bowe, who also competed at the same Olympics, had it just as bad. Richard Hoffer of Sports Illustrated explained, months before the Olympics, his sister Brenda had been stabbed to death while resisting a crack addict's attempt to steal her welfare money. Another brother says Bowe, in and out of jail. Another sister just can't leave that crack alone. In an interview with the New York Times in 1988, Riddick said, "You wake up to reality. I've seen guys punch police officers in the face. I've seen a guy shot taking his garbage out. You had to run or fight in Brownsville, and I got tired of running. At first, my mother opposed me boxing, but now she doesn't really mind." Unlike Golota, Bowe made it to the gold medal match at the Seoul Olympics, but lost a controversial stoppage against Lennox Lewis, who was representing Canada in the super heavyweight final, taking the silver medal. Now you can watch this fight on YouTube, and there is no doubt that the second round stoppage did seem a little premature. The referee gave Bowe 2 standing 8 counts and waved the fight off after the second one, even though Bowe seemed able to continue. Commentator Ferdy Pacheco disagreed with the stoppage, calling it very strange, but Marv Albert said Bowe took a pounding. Following the disappointment of the Olympics, Bowe turned professional and teamed up with legendary trainer Eddie Futch, who said that Bowe had more potential than any boxer he had ever trained. He said, "I've had some great fighters like Joe Frazier, Ken Norton, Larry Holmes, and I said, you have the potential to become the greatest heavyweight I ever had." And that's saying a whole lot. Eddie Futch may have been convinced, but Angelo Dundee wasn't so, comparing Bowe's attitude to that of George Foreman when he was coming out of the Olympics as lazy and erratic.
Angelo Dundee did say that in his own words, but he's powerful. He can punch. If I had him as a pro, I'd kick him in the pants. He's a multifaceted fighter, but he's a union fighter. He only throws so many punches around, but he's a one-shot banger. He can punch and he's also strong. The only question is his hands, apparently. That was Angelo Dundee's opinion. Well, Bowe finished his amateur career with a record of 104 wins and 18 losses, turning over to the professional ranks in March 1989, knocking out Lionel Butler on his debut on a Hector Camacho and Ray Mancini undercard in Reno, Nevada. So moving back to Golota, he continued to compete at an amateur level for the next 2 years from 1984 to 1990, building a record of 111 victories and only 10 defeats. In the summer of 1989, Golota travelled to America for the first time as a participant in a duel meet between the USA and Poland. Now, during that trip, he actually met his future wife, Mariola, a native of Poland who actually lived in Chicago since the age of 9, and they would eventually marry in October 1990. However, after in between travelling to the US and returning home, Andrew actually found himself in trouble with the law once again. Now, Tim Crovers explained what happened on May 12, 1990 at a disco in Poland. So this story begins as it must on the night when Andrew Golota stole another man's pants. Poor Piotr Bialosticki had no clue when he bumped into Golota at a disco in Poland that Golota was a member of the Polish national boxing team, or perhaps more important, that he was the undisputed heavyweight champion of barroom brawls. and Bielosticki rather impudently asked the 6'4", 205-pound Golota to move out of his path. Well, Golota denied the request. Full-fitted by some cocktails, the machinist, who was about half a foot and some 50 pounds smaller than Golota, challenged the similarly inebriated Golota to a fight.
Bad move, Peter, Tim Crothers wrote. After a scene that can only be described as something out of Looney Tunes, Bielosticki found himself wearing only a shiner, his BVDs and one shoe. Golota, accompanied by several boxing buddies, had removed the rest of Bielosticki's wardrobe and deposited the garments outside in the trash. Golota said, "I didn't want to hurt the guy, I just wanted to make him look silly." Now, Lou Duva explained the altercation slightly differently. He said, "From what I was told, the case came about when Andrew was in a bar with some members of the Polish national boxing team. A guy came up to them and started mouthing off, then grabbed Andrew by the arm and ripped his shirt. Andrew told the guy that he had to pay for the shirt. The guy said he didn't have any money, so Andrew pushed him into the bathroom and demanded the money. The guy told the cops that Andrew pulled a gun on him, and when the guy told Andrew he didn't have any money, Andrew stripped him down to his underwear and one sock and threw him in the garbage bin outside the bar. Fortunately for Andrew, he left the bar before the cops arrived." Lou Duva added, "Apparently, there was a warrant out for his arrest on armed robbery charges, and it was clear that if he ever entered the country again, he'd be arrested and jailed on the spot." Tim Crothers reported that, a few months later, facing charges of assault and robbery that could carry a punishment of 5 years in jail, Golota fled his native Poland and has not returned. Polish journalist Peter Garzik said he was involved in a brawl in a bar, supposedly got involved, and he was afraid that he would go to jail, so he basically escaped from Poland.
Before Andrew actually fled his homeland, that was when he married Mariola in 1990 in a civil service, moved to Chicago, Illinois, which is the city with the largest Polish population outside of Warsaw, and had a Catholic ceremony months later. Luka Bolka said that Chicago was a place where Andrew Golota could fight and where he could find some employment or some kind of support. Well, Golota was looking to settle down, keep his head down obviously, and find work, but he became increasingly frustrated because he didn't speak the language very well, and to be honest, he never really improved much in his English either as he went through his life there. But either way, the best option for him at the time, he thought, was a career as a truck driver. A Polish journalist, Peter Garicek, actually explained that when he came to the States, he said, "My boxing career is over. I want to be a truck driver." This was his dream, to have an 18-wheeler and just go to Arizona. So there you go. But fighting was what he did best. It was in his blood. So it was no surprise that boxing would actually find him. And Lou Duva again, he recalled that one day at the O'Hare Airport in Chicago, he was actually spotted by a US Customs agent called Dick Trindle, who was also a USA boxing official. Now, Trindle actually steered him towards a guy called Bob O'Donnell's Windy City gym, and O'Donnell became his manager. And through Golota, though Golota was initially intimidated by professional boxing, it was actually Mariola, his wife, that persuaded him to return to the ring. Well, she twisted his arm enough for a return to boxing, but his expectations were very limited. And Peter Garicek again said that he was hoping, so this is his words about Golota, he was hoping in the beginning that boxing would be a temporary thing. I will just earn a couple of bucks and then be done and be a businessman. That was his idea. But then his career started to progress. And Andrew worked with O'Donnell, the local small-time Chicago promoter, and he eventually turned professional in 1992.
O'Donnell had Andrew fighting regionally and took him to Milwaukee for his debut, where he was supposed to get $100 a round. Andrew pounded his opponent and had the guy ready to drop within just a few seconds. Not wanting to lose any money, he held him up until the second round so he could collect an additional $100. Now, a year before Golota made his debut, Riddick Bowe had been matched with plenty of journeymen by his manager Rock Newman before he faced anyone significant, which came in the mould of former world champion Pinkland Thomas. The younger, bigger and stronger Bowe was too much for Thomas, so it was no surprise when his corner stopped the fight in round 8. His next fight was against Bert Cooper, who he knocked out in just 2 rounds, but then in March 1991, Bowe signed a 2-fight $1 million deal with ABC and knocked out the 1984 Olympic super heavyweight gold medalist Tyrell Biggs in 8 rounds. He then faced ex-champion Tony Tubbs a month later at the Caesars Hotel and Casino in Atlantic City, New Jersey. Bowe used his excellent left jab to great effect, but wasn't able to hit the elusive Tubbs with anything significant. It was a fight that exposed a weakness to Bowe's armoury, and that he struggled with elusive fighters that could jab and move. All 3 judges gave Bowe the win unanimously, but it was very close and the crowd booed the decision. Rock Newman said he would now be looking towards a fight with either Evander Holyfield or Mike Tyson in 1992. But first, he had to get past Elijah Tillery, a sparring partner of Mike Tyson's at the RFK Stadium in Washington, which turned out to be one of the most bizarre bouts in boxing, remembered as the Crazy Fight.
So we're going to use the New York Times, their report on this, and they reported that the fight wasn't much, but the ruckus that followed kept the crowd's interest. So Bowe battered Tillery in the first round, even scoring a knockdown. Then strange things began to happen. Now with Bowe's back against the ropes, Tillery proceeded to kick at Bowe 3 times until his manager, Rock Newman, climbed onto the ring apron and grabbed Tillery from behind. At that point, Bowe threw a roundhouse right and Tillery tumbled backwards out of the ring. In his follow-through, Bowe nearly went over the ropes too, but he stayed upright. As Tillery was helped back into his corner, the referee Cole Milligan waved an end to the fight, disqualifying Tillery, presumably for unsportsmanlike conduct, although it was not specified. I'm guessing it probably was. If you ain't seen it, look, the footage is on YouTube, so if you haven't seen it already, then we advise you to go back and have a look, because explaining what happened just doesn't do this justice. Jason Harris, who was a member of Bowe's security staff, actually was there, and he said that Rock wasn't going to have Elijah kicking Riddick, injuring him and then throwing him off for a year or 2. Rock Newman literally tag teams him and drags him over the road. It's like WWE. It's amazing. At a news conference afterwards, Bowe said, Tillery was taunting me at the end of the round. I pushed him and he just went berserk. He has to learn to maintain his composure. I don't think he wanted to fight anymore. Tillery, well, he told the news reporters that he had no regrets. He said, I did it as in kick Bowe in the heat of combat. I've got a fighting spirit, man. That's what he said. I've just got a fighting spirit, man. So there you go. Great, interesting fight. If you haven't seen it, do look at it. So with the victory, Bowe actually improved to a record of 27-0 with 23 knockouts by now. He had won the WBC Continental Americans heavyweight title along with it. They had a rematch 2 months later in a less eventful fight. Bowe actually stopped him in 4 rounds. Then Bowe recorded 2 more knockout wins over Conroy Nelson and Everett Martin before his team were involved in a dispute with Team Holyfield.
Riddick was expected to become the WBC's mandatory challenger because of Tyson's conviction, and received bad news when the WBC actually pushed Razor Ruddock ahead of him in its latest rankings by March of 1992. Some saw that decision as a move beneficial to Don King, who had a financial involvement with Ruddock. But Murad Mohammed, Ruddock's promoter, said that Ruddock was dropped by the WBC rankings for not paying $150,000 in sanction fees before he was reinstated as their number 2 once he had paid the money. Bowe then went on to stop the number 1 contender, Pierre Coetzer, in the 7th round. His next fight 4 months later came against the WBA, WBC and IBF world champion Evander Holyfield, a tale that we have gone through in another Legendary Nights episode. Now, before the first Holyfield fight, Bowe, he had always had issues with his diet. Rumour has it that he was banned from the kitchen during his camps because he would overindulge. He lacked a drive and was known to be lazy, as Angelo Dundee mentioned earlier, but his talent was never in question. However, preparations for the Holyfield bout were a complete contrast. He was determined to become the undisputed heavyweight champion, so his training camp leading into the biggest fight of his life was, as Rock Newman put it, was probably the best training that we had ever had. Bowe was ready to fight for the title. The question was, would Bowe have the heart to match Holyfield? He certainly had the size and the knockout power. 24 of his 27 fights had ended within 5 rounds. More than enough evidence that Bowe could certainly bang. Bowe did fulfill his potential on that night of November the 13th, 1992 at Caesars Palace, Nevada, taking a unanimous decision in an entertaining fight. He floored Holyfield in the 11th round. However, it was the 10th round that most boxing fans will remember.
The epic, brutal back-and-forth exchanges helped make it Ring Magazine's Round of the Year. Commentator Al Bernstein called it one of the greatest rounds in boxing history, period. So before the second Holyfield fight, Bowe signed an agreement with the WBC to make his first title defence against the winner of the number 1 ranked Razor Ruddock and number 2 ranked Lennox Lewis, which Lewis won by a second round knockout. But a debate on financial splits. Now, we have been through this on many other episodes as well, and you can read it. I'm sure those that live around the time, there's endless information out there. It actually resulted in Bowe holding a news press conference and chucking his WBC title in the dustbin on the 14th of December 1992. And Bowe at this conference said, if Lewis wants the belt, he has to go and get it out of the garbage. Well, Boxing Insider actually confirmed in an article that it was only a tour belt, apparently, and that he had dumped in the bin, and that Bowe's people actually retrieved it after the cameras were turned off. So it's a bit of a publicity stunt. Irrespective of that, the WBC declared that Lennox Lewis was now the new WBC heavyweight champion. Bowe kept hold of his WBA and IBF heavyweight titles and would successfully defend them in easy defences and victories over Michael Dokes and Jesse Ferguson within a combined total of 5 minutes and 36 seconds. Bowe then took a rematch against Evander Holyfield on November 6, 1993, but his attitude was not as intense in the lead-up. Mark Kriegel of the New York Daily News actually described Bowe's physique and his style at this time. He said he was long, he was strong, he could move, and he could also fight inside, which was peculiar for such a big guy. He had a great uppercut, he had all the physical tools. The trouble was, his desire to keep himself disciplined and in shape was always his Achilles heel. Again, Mark Kriegel explained Eddie Futch's niggling uncertainties on his fighter. He, as in Eddie Futch, had some doubts as to whether or not Bowe would discipline himself and not let himself disintegrate in between fights.
Rock Newman added he loved the idea of the trappings of success. He hated the process of preparing to be great. Bowe explained his reason and he said, I felt like I had worked so hard that I could enjoy myself, and that's what I did. You only live once. Those doubts and concerns were almost immediately confirmed when Bowe, the 5-1 favourite, arrived at the weigh-in out of shape. In fact, because he was 11 pounds heavier than when he fought Holyfield in the first fight, the odds went down to 2.5 to 1. Bowe weighed in at 246 pounds to Holyfield's 217 pounds. Again, for more information on the bout, please do check out The Tale of Holyfield and Bowe. But in brief, another extraordinary moment in boxing history revealed its ugly head on another Riddick Bowe fight. With 1 minute and 50 seconds left of round 7, both fighters looked up to find a parachutist who had circled the outdoor ring at Caesars Palace and then suddenly descended towards the ring and landed in the ropes near Bowe's corner. His chute actually got tangled in the lights, which lit up the ring. Holyfield actually spoke of his fear at the time and he said, it was scary. I don't know if the man had something, as in a weapon or not. What were his intentions? Several people at ringside then began to hit the parachutist known as James the Fanman Miller, who ended up needing treatment by the on-site medical team, where he was stabilised on a stretcher and wheeled from the arena. Jason Harris recalled the moment Miller landed in front of them and he said, we was like, hold up, this guy's fucking us up. Rock Newman couldn't believe his eyes. How does this stuff find us? It was just utter chaos. All you could do was try to react to it as best you could. Miller would later say, It was a heavyweight fight, and I was the only guy who got knocked out.
Miller actually told the authorities that he tried to land in the ring as a form of protest. So there you go. And Bowe's wife, Judy, who was 3 months pregnant at the time, actually become faint during the incident. It was probably just all too much for her. She was actually taken to hospital as a precautionary measure. The fight was delayed by 21 minutes, with the fighters sat in their corners, wrapped in robes and blankets to keep them warm, while most fans stayed in their seats. When the fight finally resumed, it was Holyfield who performed better for the remaining rounds, as Bowe went on to lose the fight by a majority decision. Bowe actually told the press, "We'll be back. It was unfortunate when the guy came out of the sky. He frightened my wife," before adding, "I've got to be with her in hospital now. Tell her Van Dye said congratulations. I think we've got to do it again." Now, although the fan man was a decent excuse for Bowe losing that fight, many began to question his discipline again. Al Bernstein, then working as a broadcaster on ESPN, was one of those, and he said that Riddick Bowe was starting to squander the enormous physical talents that he had. Rock Newman explained years later, it had to do with him living badly. A weight fluctuation of 50, 60, 70 pound swings, and that yo-yo effect over time eroded his reflexes and hurt his skills. Now, while Riddick Bowe was looking to build towards another surge on the heavyweight scene, Andrew Golota was still slowly rising through the ranks. He had continued to knock out body after body, most of which in the first round in front of boisterous Polish crowds in Chicago. Peter Garanchek said, "In the Polish community, he was like Rocky, but the Poles don't really understand boxing." At the beginning, they said to Andrew, "Why not fight Evander Holyfield on Wednesday, then Mike Tyson on Friday, and you'll be world champion by the weekend?"
You've got to love that theory, but of course O'Donnell understood that wasn't possible, who had now guided Andrew to an undefeated record in his first 18 fights from 1992 to 1994. However, Golota decided to make a change in camp, hooking up with local businessman Ziggy Rozlaski. And Lou Duva explained that Andrew always thought he was a great businessman, so he and Rozlaski hit it off. Now, moving back to Riddick Bowe, who had spent 9 months out of the ring after losing his world titles due to injuries and fights not materialising, he came back against the undefeated Buster Mathis Jr. on August 13th, 1994 in Atlantic City. And this was another surreal moment in the career of Bowe, as the New York Times explained what happened. In the confusion Saturday night, Riddick Bowe was awarded a no contest decision against Buster Mathis Jr. Awarded because Arthur Mercante, the 74-year-old referee, ruled that Bowe had deliberately hit Mathis after he was already down on one knee in the 4th round. Mathis, who lost every round on every scorecard, could not continue after the final blow from Bowe. Although Bowe had dominated the bout, he could easily have been disqualified for the last punch he threw. Instead, the fight halted at 2 minutes and 11 seconds of the 4th round, with Mathis flat on his back after the illegal punch, which merely adds another footnote to the sport's legacy of lunacy. Although Bowe appeared to get off the hook with the no contest ruling, he is not free and clear yet. Cedric Kushner, Mathis's promoter, said today that he had no doubt that the fight should have ended with a disqualification and that he might seek a legal remedy. Kushner maintained that several years ago, in another fight he promoted in the same ring, Marlon Starling lost his WBA welterweight title on a disqualification when he knocked out Thomas Molinares with a punch after the round had ended.
Yeah, so Kushner actually continued that if Riddick is allowed to have a no contest with an illegal punch, then that sets a precedent. Any fighter who's losing, for example, can just hit the other guy when he's down or the round is over. You had a good point. And the New York Times actually confirmed that usually a no contest decision is awarded when an accidental punch is thrown or there is an accidental butt and the other fighter can't continue. But if the fight has gone at least half the scheduled distance, which this fight had done, then the decision is based on who was winning it up to that point. However, in this case, Mercante ruled Bowe's punch was deliberate. It was a punch that was thrown a moment that Mathis apparently intentionally sank to one knee to avoid the constant barrage of punches Bowe had battered him with. So Mercante signalled the fight over as Mathis was prone on the canvas. Then everyone who had a connection with either fighter seemed to jump into the ring or climb onto the apron. Larry Hazard, who was the commissioner of the State Athletic Control Board, actually began deliberating with fellow board members and debating with Newman and giving television interviews. At one point, board members actually consulted Mercante, who told them that he believed that Bowe's punch, while deliberate, had come at the heat of the battle. Eventually, the board concluded that seemed to, of course, satisfy Bowe and Newman more than anybody else. Indeed, Newman put on his best judical face when he said, "I think it was fair." He was unsmiling. He knew how close he had come to a loss, and Hazard said that we felt we could not allow Bowe to win the fight, even he had gone 5 rounds, half the number of the scheduled, but the referee ruled it was deliberate. So it was a crazy moment. Other board members contended they did not bend the rules in Bowe's favour, which some questioned, as the decision did raise many questions within the industry.
Well, it certainly did raise some questions within the industry. And if you thought that was the end of the bizarre moments in Riddick Bowe's career, well, of course you're wrong. In the press conference 5 days before his fight with Larry Donald, Bowe punched his opponent on the chin. Larry Donald, an Olympic bronze medalist, had talked a little trash about Bowe in the run-up to their 1994 fight, which didn't sit well with him. Both men met in Los Angeles, where Bowe hit Donald with a 1-2 combination, stunning Donald before they were quickly separated. Donald did not retaliate, but said Bowe was unprofessional, afraid, and stated, "When you try so hard to intimidate someone, it means that you're the one who's intimidated." When asked the reason for the punch, Bowe said he told Donald, "If you say one more thing, I'm going to hit you." He opened his mouth again, so I popped him. Steve Nelson, co-manager for Donald, said, "It was a total surprise. It hurt. They were both full punches. The second one was blocked a little bit." Following the assault outside the ring, the fight still went ahead as planned, with Bowe taking a unanimous 12-round decision in an uneventful fight. Bowe said before leaving the ring, "I think I proved without a doubt I'm the best heavyweight in the world. I know it was pretty easy." By the time he got to the post-fight press conference, it got uglier. The Donald camp served legal papers to Bowe seeking assault and battery damages for the punches landed in Los Angeles. But a melee ensued between the two camps, and more than a dozen members of the Las Vegas Police Department stormed the tent and separated members of the two camps. A few days later, Bowe apologised to Donald for his actions, which Larry accepted, and the charges were dropped.
Yeah, so both fighters then actually agreed to put their differences aside and use their recognition for good by working with the organisation Neighbourhoods Against Crime. They declared that they were joining together to do what they could to stop violence in various communities. Bowe apologised publicly for that press conference incident, saying, "It should not have happened. I'm sorry for it. I want to show kids that hitting people isn't the way to solve problems. At the time, I was too emotional and let my feelings get the best of me. I apologise to Larry Donald and the rest of the world for my inappropriate behaviour and promise everyone that the only fighting I will be doing in the future is in the ring." So moving from Los Angeles to Chicago, we're with Andrew Golota, who was now 22-0 with 20 knockouts by January 1995. His new manager, Rozalski, who didn't know anything about boxing. Apparently, he didn't even know how many minutes there were in a round. This guy knew nothing. Well, he actually purchased Rocky Marciano's gym in Jersey City, and according to Lou Duva, allowed Andrew to buy into the business. Now, although Rozalski was just a businessman, he knew that his fighter was ready to be moved on to the next level. So, he called up the services of Lou Duva from Main Events, asking him to take a look at this big white heavyweight called Andrew Golota, who was managing in his gym in 1995. And Lou Duva recalled his first impression of when he met Golota. So he said, "He was a real quiet type. He didn't say much, but I wasn't sure if it was because his English wasn't that great or from the stutter when he spoke. But he sure knew how to fight. I could see that from the first time I watched him spar. He had certainly earned that bronze medal in the 1988 Olympics. He had great size for a heavyweight, 6'3" and 230 pounds.
Lou explained his qualities and he said he had a good jab, decent power, and already had over 20 pro fights and was undefeated. In my mind, he was definitely ready to take the next step. Within a year of Andrew signing with Main Events, we had moved him into a position as a serious contender. However, it didn't take long for Lou to realise that it wasn't going to be as easy to guide Andrew in the right direction when he said, if Evander Holyfield was the perfect heavyweight, then Andrew Golota was the exact opposite. Evander was the ultimate professional, a real man inside and outside the ring. You never had to hold Evander's hand to get him to do anything. Just point him in the right direction and your job was done. Unfortunately, with Andrew, even if you did point him in the right direction, he'd take a wrong turn somewhere down the road and run into a ditch. Andrew was like a temperamental teenager. He would just melt down if you didn't treat him a certain way. On May the 16th, 1995, Golota took on Samson Puha at Resorts in Atlantic City. And this was an early warning sign that Andrew was capable of doing crazy things in the ring. Lou remembered what happened that night when he said Puha weighed 278 pounds and probably would have been a decent fighter if he took his training more seriously and did the required amount of road work to keep his stamina up. And he put in more rounds and he was working the pads and he ate proper food. He was 15-1 at the time and it was supposed to be a good fight between two up-and-coming heavyweights. Andrew was having his way for the first 3 rounds, but as with Andrew, something I would soon learn, things change quickly.
Lou continues that in the 4th round, Puha actually landed a right hand that staggered Andrew and kept pounding away so that Andrew had to hold on to survive. Now, while they were in the clinch, Andrew made like a Polish Dracula and he actually bit Puha on the shoulder. Obviously, Puha reacted and tried to tell referee Eddie Cotton that he had been bitten, but Cotton either didn't hear him or ignored his plea. So after the break, Cotton told them to fight, and Puha's weakest protest gave Andrew a few more seconds to clear his head, and Andrew rallied in the 5th round and knocked down Puha 3 times. So after the 3rd knockdown, Cotton waved off the fight, and Andrew had somehow escaped without getting disqualified. Well, Golota's assistant, Sam Colina, actually said he asked Andrew, "Did you bite the guy?" And Andrew looked at us and said, "I had to bite the motherfucker." Well, his trainer Sam actually added that I don't think he does it intentionally. I think something just goes in his mind and he just blanks out. That's pretty much what happens. And Lou Duva actually described what happened after the fight. He said a reporter came to the dressing room and was asking us about the fight and, of course, the bite. No one knew about the bite except Andrew. Of course, he claimed he didn't do it, but he was caught on camera and it made the headlines the following week. I was angry and embarrassed by what he did. I'd never really worked with someone who would deliberately foul another boxer like that. I asked Andrew why he did it, but he didn't answer. He just shrugged like a kid who knew he had done something wrong, and he would look at you and he refused to answer when you confronted him. He knew he screwed up, but getting him to admit it was impossible. You never knew why he did the stuff that he did.
Lou Duva told a story about Andrew in his book, and he recalled, there was another time when we stopped at a drugstore and there was a girl clerking there with a parrot. Andrew started playing with the parrot. He got some peanuts and started feeding the parrot peanuts. We got ready to leave the store. Who's going to pay for all the peanuts? The girl asked. I'm not going to pay for the peanuts. The parrot ate the peanuts. I didn't eat the peanuts, Andrew said. He walked out of the store and I had to pay for the peanuts. But that's the way he was. He had a screw loose. Okay, he had a few screws loose. Well, going back to his future opponent Riddick Bowe, he was put into a world title bout on March the 11th, 1995 at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas for the less prestigious WBO title held by the undefeated British African Herbie Hyde. It was perfect timing as Bowe became a 2-time world champion when he knocked out Hyde in 6 rounds. 3 months later, Bowe made a first and last defence of the world title when he made light work of another undefeated fighter in Jorge Luis Gonzalez on June 17, 1995, back at the MGM Grand, knocking out the Cuban also in 6 rounds. Riddick ended up getting stripped of the title because some sources suggest he rejected a Don King purse offer, but others say that it was Holyfield who did not want to challenge for the WBO title as he thought it would politically hinder his chances of gaining a match for the WBA, WBC and IBF titles. Either way, Bowe signed to fight Evander Holyfield in a non-title rubber match at the Caesars Palace Outdoor Arena in Vegas on November the 4th, 1995.
Again, we keep mentioning it, but we have gone through this fight in the Tale of Holyfield Bowe. So in short, the highlights from the fight were the 6th round, when a left hook to the chin actually put Bowe down for the first time in his career. And then in the 8th round, when Holyfield was dropped with a right hand, he got up at the count of 9, but was quickly dropped again by 2 right hands, forcing the referee to stop the fight. The first time Evander Holyfield was stopped. And in Mark Kriegel's assessment, that was that even though he, as in Riddick Bowe, won the 3rd Holyfield fight, he won primarily because Holyfield just got tired. He was able to knock him out. So he's basically saying that he still wasn't great. So at this point, Andrew Golota was being moved into a big fight. The promoter of main events, Dennis Jewton, explained, he's 25-0. He's starting to gain some recognition. He's a big white guy, and there's an appeal there. He wasn't just a white guy. He was a white guy that could fight. Well, main events were clearly optimistic about his future, even though he was a loose cannon at times. Lou Duva said that he was big, good-looking, strong guy, could punch and could fight. He could do it all, basically. Andrew actually fought 3 more times after the bite fight against that poor guy, and was now 27-0 and was becoming a serious contender in the heavyweight championship. His last fight before he took on Riddick Bowe was against a guy called Darnell Nicholson. And once again, his unpredictability came booming to the forefront, and Sam Colina explains. So he's winning every round. He's got the guy under control. He's hurting him, but yet because he was going into the later rounds, he headbutted the guy. He does not know how to handle pressure. And, well, Golota had used his vicious headbutt to daze Nicholson in the 5th round before knocking him out in the 8th.
Now, main events felt like they had done everything necessary to get him ready for a title shot. It was up to Andrew to give them another heavyweight champion. And Lou Duva explained, if he could hold his own against Bowe, then we knew he was ready for the big time. For Rock Newman, Golota was the ideal opponent for Bowe. Good, but not too good. However, Bowe had been out of the ring for 8 months since winning his 3rd fight against Holyfield, which was the 2nd longest streak he'd gone without fighting in his career. So now, we're going to move in to the build-up for the first fight between Riddick Bowe and Andrew Golota. And we're going to start with a New York Times report which explained the current climate of heavyweight boxing on May 19th, 1996. And it does set the scene well when it reads, Mike Tyson's march to regaining the unified heavyweight crown was back in step yesterday. And all it took was $4 million. As a result of the deal for that amount he made yesterday with Lennox Lewis, Tyson is now free to go after Bruce Seldon's WBA title, while Lewis, the British challenger, with the crushing right, will meet Riddick Bowe in a non-title affair in September. Tyson has already regained the WBC belt following his 3-year layoff in prison. After he presumably defeats Seldon in a bout on July 13th, he can go after the holder of the IBF crown, which is vacant. Michael Moorer and Axel Schultz will meet for that title on June 22nd in Germany. Meanwhile, Bowe, who said yesterday he kept fighting because I must fight Tyson one day, will face Andrew Golota on July 11th in Madison Square Garden. It is the showpiece of another attractive Garden card, which includes Ray Mercer, Shannon Briggs and Arturo Gatti. So before Bowe and Lewis could finally meet for a bout penciled in to take place sometimes later in the year, they opted to have one warm-up fight each.
Yes, apparently it was a potential fight at the end of the year, and Lewis won his tune-up fight on May 10, 1996 against the WBO world champion Ray Mercer by a disputed majority decision at Madison Square Garden. And Bowe actually elected to take on the undefeated Polish heavyweight, Andrew Golota. So at the time, Rock Newman claimed to have made all the right moves to get a world-class opponent, but these other fighters, he called them, are afraid of Bowe, and Riddick promised to get one of the big names in the ring. And he actually said that Lennox Lewis and Tyson keep me going. I'm not going anywhere till I fight Tyson. The New York Times actually wrote that other than that fight, the Tyson fight, most of the other opponents bore him. He could summon up interest in Lewis though, and Bowe said Lennox Lewis hasn't learned to fight yet. I'd keep the pressure on him. He can't fight going backward. Those big-footed guys get tangled. I'd jab him like Ray Mercer did in their fight. However, he felt that Tyson actually presented him with a different problem. He said, I'd have to box Tyson just like Buster Douglas did, but I'd knock him out sooner. Tyson was trouble with big guys, but if you look at my career, I've had trouble with little guys. They move a lot. Then again, Tyson comes right at you, so it could be an easy fight. Bowe said he wanted only those fighters who could define his career, but for now it was Andrew Golota, a man that was actually at a training camp in Florida with Lou Duva as he prepared for the biggest fight of his career against Riddick Bowe. And Lou sort of explained how it was going. He explained that one day before the first Riddick Bowe fight in 1996, he ran out of the gym crying. I can't do this, he said, sobbing uncontrollably. That's when I knew we were in trouble with Andrew.
Lou remembered another time and he said, but even before that, there were little signs here and there that should have opened our eyes. My shoulder hurts, he said one time. We had a doctor that we used with him, Dr. Stephen Stoller. He travelled with Andrew because he had so many ailments. Dr. Stoller examined his shoulder 3 times and couldn't find anything wrong. We knew he was faking, so we had Dr. Stoller come into the room and leave a big needle on the table and walk out. When Dr. Stoller came back into the room, I started talking to him. Why don't you do to him what you did with the other fighter I brought to you? Dr. Stoller picked up the needle and started walking towards Andrew. I feel better, Andrew said before running out of the room. His anxiety wasn't helped when at the weigh-in, Andrew found out for the first time that instead of fighting 10 rounds, the match would be 12. Bowe entered the fight at a career-high 252 pounds, 12 pounds heavier than what he weighed in his previous match with Holyfield. He, nevertheless, was made a 12-1 favourite. When explaining his weight gain, Bowe made it clear that he had not trained much for Golota, infamously asking, "How do you train for a bum?" He also called Golota a Polish joke. That's how Bowe saw Golota before the bout. Lou Duva remained confident that his fighter could defeat Bowe, saying of Bowe's weight gain, "He's everything I want him to be." He explained in his book, "We took one look at Bowe at the weigh-in and just knew that Andrew would have his way with him at the Garden that night." The New York Times saw it too. The headline of the article was, "Riddick looks fat and juicy," with the subheading, "Polish foe licks chops."
In retrospect, Bowe looked back on his approach to the Golota fight and said, I just looked at it as a payday. I thought 2-3 rounds and we'll be going. And Tom Lovato of the Washington Times also thought it'd be an easy night. He said that I just thought they're sticking him in against an opponent just to keep him busy until the whole thing with Mike Tyson can eventually be set up. Jim Lampley also thought that it would be a foregone conclusion, but knew that at some point that Bowe's weight issues would become a problem. And he said, if he's always going up and down on the scale, sooner or later, he would pay a price for that. But you didn't necessarily suspect it was going to come against a guy like Golota. Lou Duva actually remembered what happened after the weigh-in. So in his words, he said he went back to the hotel across the street from the Garden and decided he wasn't going to fight unless he got more money than the $600,000 purse he was guaranteed. This was his way of showing that he was a good businessman. He asked for another $50,000 to go through with the fight. and HBO actually came up with 25,000 and the fight was on. The broadcasters made a big deal out of it, saying it nearly ended the fight. But they were just being dramatic. The fight wasn't in jeopardy of not happening. Andrew was just a good poker player. In the end, he would have fought for what he was contracted to fight for. But he was pressing his advantage when he had it. And in some cases, Andrew was crazy like a fox. Well, Andrew, the powerful pole, as was his nickname, Golota, hadn't lost in any of his previous 28 professional fights, registering 25 knockouts and demonstrating his eagerness to do anything to win. But most experts believed that Golota had bitten off more than he could chew against someone like Riddick Big Daddy Bowe, who was 37-1 with 32 knockouts.
Tonight, live from Madison Square Garden in New York City, just behind the Lady of Liberty, HBO Sports presents World Championship Boxing. Tonight, former heavyweight champion Riddick Bowe takes on young, tough, former Polish Olympic bronze medalist Andrew Golota in a bout now scheduled for 12 rounds. On a beautiful day in New York City, a brisk last-minute walk-in trade brings a pretty good crowd to the place where 17,000 gathered 2 months ago for a heavyweight triple-header. Tonight, the spotlight falls squarely on the shoulders of the man whose supporters call him the best heavyweight in the division, regardless of title belts, Riddick Bowe. We'll see what he can do in his first return to the ring since winning the third bout in his trilogy with Evander Holyfield.
Bowe was rightly installed as the heavy favourite, and it was expected to be a one-sided fight. However, there was an expectation that maybe something could happen inside Madison Square Garden with HBO's Championship Boxing and Broadcast, even though the fight wasn't for a title. The referee, Wayne Kelly, had a feeling about the fight's expectation, but not necessarily just in the ring. He said, "Prior to refereeing the fight, several people in the boxing business had warned me of Golota's reputation of the low blows and hitting behind the head and biting, etc. And Lou Duva, Rock Newman, also had a reputation of being excitable. So I had quite a few concerns going into that fight." The recipe for disaster was in place for July 11th, 1996, in the heart of New York City. Tom Lavero of the Washington Times recalled that the crowd was much more frenzied than I expected for a fight most people in boxing had very little expectations of. Larry Merchant explained that boxing has always been an ethic-orientated sport. There had been no Polish serious heavyweight in the memory of man, and here he was, and his supporters stood and roared. The garden was electric, with many of the Polish fans in the upper levels waving the red and white flags. Bowe's fans thought the former champion would just walk through this unknown guy from Poland. Peter Garachik sensed a hostile environment was coming from the Brownsville people who had problem with the white people from Poland. The people from Brownsville didn't like the red and white flags being thrown in their faces. Jason Harris, the security guy for Bowe, described the arena as almost half of the stadium were Polish. He explained that he found them hostile, and he said they had flags and they were ready to fight before the fight had even started. With that energy in there, it was like boom, just waiting to go off.
And Jim Lampley explained the dynamic. People don't need to wear jerseys when one fighter is white and Polish and the other fighter is black and from Brownsville. So as the fight approached, referee Wayne Kelly went about his job, saying that prior to the fight, I head to the dressing rooms of each fighter. I went to Andrew Golota and I said, "Andrew, I don't want any of that stuff going on tonight." And he just looked at me in the eye and he said, "I do what I have to do to win." Well, before we move into the fight, we will use Jim Lampley's description of the Riddick Bowe and Andrew Golota fight on HBO's legendary Night Show. In his introduction, he said, "Bowe Golota, which for its own reasons ranks as one of the most memorable fights in 30 years of boxing on HBO. In this case, it's worth noting, memorable need not mean great fight. What made this Madison Square Garden night unforgettable was something totally unforeseen. A moment when a volatile mix of circumstances in and out of the ring lit a match and touched off an explosion. And that's a great way to move into the fight, which we're going to do now. So, from rounds 1 to 2, from the beginning, on the opening bell, Golota showed that he had the size and the skill to compete with Bowe, who recalled it was the first round that he hit me with the jab at will. It surprised me and it threw me off. Golota set about proving he could box as he continued to out-jab Bowe, the man considered by many to have one of the best jabs in his division. Golota regularly beat the overweight former champion to the punch time and time again in the first round, and the pattern continued in the second round. But then, one of Golota's body punches wandered a little south. He was immediately warned to keep his hands up, a moment that Golota actually admitted was intentional.
Golota said, "The first low blow was real. Bowe hit me behind the back of the head and in the kidney, and I said, 'You've got to feel something too. Here's something back.'" So going into rounds 2 and 3, Lou Duva was happy with how the fight was actually playing out, and he said, through the first few rounds, the fight was playing out exactly like we expected it would. Bowe was surprised at how skilled a boxer Andrew was, and if Andrew had played it straight, he probably would have knocked him out. Tom Lavero couldn't believe what he was seeing after the first few rounds. He said, "I remember as the rounds went on turning to a writer next to me and saying, 'This guy looks like Jack Dempsey.'" But as we have explained throughout this tale so far, Andrew was always likely to do something out of the ordinary. Mark Kriegel, who was watching on from ringside, described what he was seeing. First, there was a shock that Golota was so clearly superior to Bowe. Then there is this shock that he's hitting him low and keeps hitting him low. What the hell's going on here? Golota was given a second warning by Wayne Kelly late in the second round, informing him that the next low blow will be a point deduction. Then, in the third round, Golota landed another low shot to Bowe's crotch that was hard enough to send the former world champion to the canvas. Kelly took a point away from Golota and allowed Bowe 5 minutes to recover. Lou Duva said, "He couldn't help himself. He had to go low. When he first started dropping his punches toward the end of the third, I thought it was just an honest mistake. But after it happened a couple of more times, my mind started to go towards Andrew's history of bending the rules in the ring."
Rounds 3 to 7, Lou said that referee Wayne Kelly kept warning Andrew to stop hitting low. But it was as if Andrew couldn't hear him. We were screaming from the corner, and when he came over after the round, I got in his face. I continued screaming, "Andrew, don't throw anything below the shoulder. Just hit him in the head. You understand?" "Yeah, I understand." But he went right back out and did it again and again. We didn't understand what was going on in his head. The only thing I kept thinking was, why? Well, Golota was then penalised a point for a low blow in the fourth round, even though he's actually winning another one of those rounds. So this time, his other corner man, Roger Bloodworth, actually said to him, "Look, you got this fight won. Do not hit him to the body anymore." Although Golota must have listened to his corner in the fifth, he was back at it again in the sixth, where he lost yet another point. And Jim Lampley, who was on commentary duty, of course, for HBO, was just gobsmacked. He said, "It just seemed unfathomable that he was going to give away this easy victory, but you just had to observe the inevitability that it was probably going to happen." And by round 7, Kelly had already deducted 2 points from Andrew for hitting low. But after deducting a third point for a low blow in the 7th, Kelly told Andrew that if he threw another one more, he will be disqualified. And Lou Duva said, "We were hoping that would be enough to keep him from going below the belt again." It wasn't. And Kelly recalled the moment himself in the documentary, Legendary Arts documentary. He said, "I looked him right in the eye and I said, 'Andrew, if you hit him low one more time, it's over. Do you understand that?' And he said, 'Yes, I do.' Walked out there and hit him low."
Whenever Golota throws the combination, the things go good for him.
He's just hammering Bowe in close. Just hammering it. That was another low blow. Down goes Bowe, and that's it.
That's it. Great.
It's a disqualification.
It's time to someone to understand that you're going to have to keep the rules in this business.
And now there's a fight in the ring that's been started by Some of Bowe's handlers will went after Lou Duva, and somebody's going to get hurt in there. Somebody's going to get hurt. And there are more people trying to go in. And
Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. They'll stop it. Don't. Get back. Go back where you'll see the tongue. Get on back.
My microphone got knocked off my head.
Don't do it, son. Don't do
There's
that.
danger all over the place here. This is a very desperate situation. Lou Duva's in trouble. Lou Duva's in trouble on the ring mat. Duva's down and hurt. They're lifting Duva out of the ring.
They're going to cool it out.
Duva trying to help his dad out. This is just an awful-looking situation in there.
So we're going to let Lou Duva round off the final moments of this fight. And he said, with a little under a minute left in the 7th round, Andrew landed a hard combination that staggered Bowe. He had the fight in hand, and it looked to be on his way to a knockout. All those headshots as well as the numerous low blows had taken the steam out of Bowe. With 30 seconds to go in the round, Andrew dropped down and delivered a perfect shot way below the belt. Bowe fell backward like a bowling pin, grabbing his crotch. Kelly waved off the fight and disqualified Andrew. After that, all hell broke loose. Inexplicably, Andrew Golota was disqualified, handing Bowe the victory, even though the former champ had won just 1 round on 2 of the judges' scorecards and 2 rounds on the other card. Lou Duva said, "I've looked at the last blow on tape 20 times, and you couldn't knock over my grandmother with that punch." Bowe was losing, so he put on an act, and it was an Academy Award performance. What happened next was nothing short of absolute carnage, where Golota was attacked by members of Bowe's entourage, one of which was Bernard Brooks Sr., who later said to the New York Times, "I went in to make sure Rock was all right. I tried to hold Golota away, but he swung at me with a left." Although the Philadelphia Daily News' Bernard Fernandez reported what we all saw, and that was Brooks instigated it all when he pushed Golota from behind. Mark Kriegel also gave his take when he said, "I remember a guy from Bowe's camp jumping into the mix and started to tomahawk Golota."
And that guy was Jason Harris, who, according to the New York Times' James Barron, quickly arrived on the scene and struck Golota on the back of the head with a walkie-talkie, which is what we can all see in that video footage. Harris is seen cracking Golota over the head with his walkie-talkie, which actually opened up a gash on his scalp, needing 13 stitches in the end. Jason Harris just said, "I wasn't going in there to hit Golota until I felt like I was assaulted." Then 74-year-old Lou Duva was knocked down during the melee and was stretchered away. Jim Lampley, while he was laying on the floor, actually recalled the moment when he saw Lou on the canvas, and he said, "The first thing I thought was, oh my God, Lou's died in there, right in the middle of all this craziness in the ring. He clearly wasn't conscious." And there is no better person to give an explanation to this whole drama that unfolded than the 74-year-old himself, Lou Duva. And he said, so right after Kelly waved his arms, members of Bowe's corner ran into the ring, trying to get to Andrew. Of course, I was in the middle of the scrum, trying to keep them from killing him. I seem to always find myself in the middle of some kind of dust-up in the ring. While trying to make peace, someone from Bowe's corner slugged Andrew in the head with a 2-way radio. Andrew had this big guy named Eno, who was a former wrestler and a bodybuilder, and his job was to protect me. He fouled. I never saw Eno in the corner keeping anyone away from me. Because I had had a few heart attacks and a history of heart problems, doctors had actually installed a defibrillator in my chest. This was the first and only time it ever went off.
Lou continued with his version of events. He said, "Everybody thought I went down from getting hit, but the truth is that I went down from a jolt of electricity when the defibrillator went off. It knocked me back in the ring and I went down. I didn't get hit. As soon as I went down, the EMT started pulling me out of the ring. Looking up from the canvas, all I could see was legs kicking and arms swinging. At the time, I didn't think it was going to be that bad. I'd been in enough ring scuffles to know they usually die down after a few minutes. But a full-blown riot erupted and was sparked from all those Golota low blows. It was completely out of control. There were no cops in the building, and the guard and security was overrun by people from the audience who rushed the ring and started trading blows. Fights were breaking out all over the arena, and the entire thing was captured by HBO cameras, which continued to roll well after the fight was called. Well, while Lou was taken to the hospital for observations, the rioting continued. Mark Kriegel tried to understand what had caused the rioting, and he said, "I don't know if it was racial, but it sort of felt tribal. It felt like what I would imagine a soccer riot could be like." Jim Lampley, always the constant professional, tried to find the best place to conclude the broadcast for HBO, and he said, "People were being hit over the head with chairs, people were getting stomped on. At that point, I realised that if I stay here, I'm not going to be able to report much longer because this whole set is bound to come apart." And I just dumped off my headset, ran up one section of Madison Square Garden to deliver a little bit more of a broader perspective of what was going on.
Absolute carnage, and Lou Duva actually explained what was happening with him while he was being taken away from the ring. So he said, "My family and the guys working the corner with me that night were scared that all the excitement would lead to another heart attack. They managed to put me on a stretcher and gave me oxygen as a precaution. They then tried to take me out of the arena, up the stairs, and through the riot. It was a bumpy riot, to say the least. A couple of times they nearly threw me off the stretcher when it tilted over on its side. 'Get me off this thing! Get me off this thing!' I kept yelling. But with all the chaos, they couldn't hear me. I was more afraid of getting dumped off the stretcher than what might happen to me in the riot. Someone even stole a ring right off my finger as I was being taken up those steps. Fortunately, I got it back later." Wow. Jim Lampley could see loads of people inside the ring and fights breaking out all over the arena from his position. And he said, "I can say in 21 years of reporting as a sports reporter and news anchor, I've never been involved in a more personally terrifying situation than this one. This ring has been stormed by thugs and hooligans." He then added, "You expect that in a matter of a minute or two, the powers that be will be going to get in, organise and get it cleared up." Well, there were no powers that be, were there? Howard Safer, the NYPD commissioner, actually gave his explanation on the security issues, because obviously this fight was going on and no one was stepping in. And he said, "It was the desire of Madison Square Garden to provide their own security, and of course this was a private arena, so unless you was invited, you can't be there."
Peter Garanchik said, "From the beginning, there was no security at all. There was a couple of guys in their 60s trying to stop guys in their 20s. Howard Safer said he was at home watching TV, and a flash came across the TV that there was a riot going on at Madison Square Garden, so I called my security detail and I responded. Some 15 minutes after Golota was attacked, Safer security force finally arrived, and order was restored 25 minutes after the fight had ended." Jim Lampley finished the broadcast with, "I got a 16-year-old daughter in here somewhere, and I'm looking to be sure that she's safe." Lou Duva then explained what happened once order was restored. He said, "The New York mayor, Rudolph Giuliani, heard about the rioting at the Garden while he was at dinner, and he raced right over. He surveyed the damage, but the rioting was so bad that he was rushed into our dressing room and kept there under guard for over an hour until things calmed down. After the dust had settled, he visited me at hospital. He told me he was concerned about my health and wanted to make sure I was all right. I really appreciated him coming by. He might have been the only one who made it through the emergency room to see me, as my own private doctor couldn't even get past the hospital security. Andrew came to the hospital that night as well. I think he came just to get paid. They should have admitted him and had his head examined. I asked him why he kept hitting Bowe low, and he said, because he kept bending down. He said he thought the referee would stop the fight because he was beating Bowe so badly and Bowe wasn't throwing anything back. He kept saying the referee should have stopped it. It made no sense then, and it still doesn't today."
The following day, Rock Newman was called to a police precinct to review the videotapes and identify anyone that was involved in the rioting. And Rock said that, "I remember being so personally angry with Golota that I went into the ring and screamed at him. 10 seconds later, the ring was full. Now history has it that I started the riot." However, newspaper reporters said that Bernard Brooks Sr. was the one who set off the riot by jumping in the ring and going after Golota. Rock Newman was suspended for a year and fined $250,000 by the New York State Athletic Commission for his role in the melee. There were 22 injured and 16 people arrested, including Jason Harris, who had a history of violence, which went back as far as the Fan Man incident, as we recalled earlier in this episode, and his weapon of choice that night was also a walkie-talkie. He was actually given a 5-year suspended sentence, and he said, "Oh, I paid my dues. I was actually in the middle of being investigated for a police department," so he's hoping to become a police officer, "and when I got back home, my investigator called me saying, 'Jason, I'm sorry.' Well, after getting caught whacking people over the head with a walkie-talkie, you're not surprised that the police force was no longer an option, in a way, for Jason Harris. Well, after the riot, Garden management actually decided not to have any more boxing at the arena for 3 years. And Lou Duva said, "Imagine that. Andrew Golota forced the mecca of boxing to shut its doors to the sport after all that history. The publicity wasn't good for them or their security. We should have known that something foul was going to happen after the fight." Bowe and his team, primarily his promoter Rock Newman, had a history of creating havoc inside the ring.
Tim Crothers wrote that the headlines above the accounts of the bout in the Polish newspapers referred to Golota as a fugitive. Golota said, "It's crazy. In Poland today, I am a hero, and I am also a wanted man." He also wrote a piece on Andrew and his potential return home. He wrote, "Now Golota is the biggest thing in Poland, next to Kielbasa and Pope John Paul II. The prodigal son admits that he would like to return to his homeland, but he is apprehensive about the pending legal action." During a recent meeting with Polish President Alexander Kwaśniewski in New York, Golota appealed for help, but the president could promise no Warsaw Pact, instead telling the boxer, "Good job in the ring, but next time keep your punches up." Kwaśniewski had no resource because in Poland, criminal charges, no matter how trivial, cannot be dropped without a trial, even though Białystok no longer wishes to pursue the matter. Białystok told a reporter, "If I could, I would forget the case and throw it from the court. Nobody likes to be beaten up, but it's always better to be beaten up by a champion." Now, the judge who would handle the case says, "We've got more important things to do in Poland." The public agrees. One Polish newspaper conducted a phone poll to sample opinion on Golota's legal fate. Clemency won by a landslide. Lou Duva said that eventually it was Golota's manager, Rosalski, who worked with 2 other lawyers and got the Polish president, Alexander Kwaśniewski, to get the charges set aside so that Andrew could go back to Poland without being detained. Lou also confirmed that a few months after the fight was over, Andrew told me that Bowe had broken his jaw in the 6th round and he nearly passed out from the pain.
Lou said that Andrew told him that he was afraid that he was going to get knocked out. And while he didn't want to lose or get knocked out, the pain was apparently too much for him. So he did the worst thing possible. He kept hitting low so he would be disqualified. It's crazy, but to him, it made sense. Well, incredibly, after all the arrests and injuries sustained during the riot in the Garden, it was named the 1996 Event of the Year by the Ring magazine. Believe it or not, all the publicity and controversy for the fight fueled a call for a rematch, which we will come to soon. Well, the New York State Athletic Commission later denied a protest of the decision to the Riddick Bowe and Andrew Golota fight, which was actually filed by Golota's camp. However, the Madison Square Garden officials did announce a revised policy regarding the security at future boxing matches. With the result to overturn the disqualification decision, Golota team then went on down a different route. They decided, well, if I ain't going to get that, and they're going to look for something else. And this is what was reported by the Washington Post. It said heavyweight boxer Andrew Golota is suing opponent Riddick Bowe and Madison Square Garden for $5 million over a post-fight melee that injured Golota, one of his cornermen, 14 spectators, and several police officers in July. In a lawsuit filed in the New Jersey State superior court, Golota and cornerman Sam Connor said they were injured because Bowe did not control his employees and because Madison Square Garden did not provide adequate security. Also named in the suit are Bowe's manager, Rock Newman, Bowe's promoter, Spencer Promotions, and Jason Harris, a one-time employee of Spencer. The suit was filed in New Jersey because the Poland-born Golota lives in Jersey City, although he fights out of Chicago. And Thomas DiBiase, Golota's lawyer, blamed the Garden for negligence because it did not phone for help for 18 minutes while fights erupted.
DiBiase said, when a world-class organisation decides to hold a sporting event, a priority should be the safety of the participants and the fans. And in this case, there was a total breakdown of any security plan. A statement released in response to the suit by the Madison Square Garden Senior Vice President John Cirillo said, we had a full complement of security on duty which had handled 5 previous arena fights without incident. Our security acted appropriately, and if it weren't for the actions of a few individuals who had total disregard for everyone else's welfare, the incident wouldn't have happened. Rock Newman called the lawsuit another dumb low blow that Golota will be disqualified for again. In his first interview since he was disqualified, Golota tried to explain his actions. He said, you're hot. You're a little bit tired. Sometimes, something happens. Golota went for a CAT scan following his head injuries, and he said, I am worried because I have some pain and some dizziness. Am I now one of the best in the world? He asked in response to a question. Everybody is tough. All the tough guys are left. I'm happy because I had a good fight. I'm a little disappointed in the ending. And if he fought Bowe again, a fight that was actually being negotiated at this time, he said that he might do something different. He said, I guess I'm smarter now. Every fight you learn something new. There was changes in Bowe's camp in October of 1996. The Seattle Times reported that Eddie Futch thinks Riddick Bowe is wasting his time, so he will no longer train the former undisputed champion. Futch, 85, told the Associated Press from his home in Las Vegas, I'm withdrawing my services from Riddick Bowe because of irreconcilable differences. It's been in the works for a long time.
And Futch continued, he said, when I started with Bowe in 1988, I told him not to waste my time, that I was not going to let him or anybody waste my time. Futch said he had not talked to Bowe, but informed manager Rock Newman. He said, I told him I can't deal with it anymore. He told me I could see it coming. Futch said he was embarrassed by Bowe's performance against Andrew Golota in the fight at Madison Square Garden and admitted, I was shocked by the way he looked when he walked into the ring. He acted like all he had to do was swat the guy and it would be over. Well, Bowe actually decided to bring in Phil Torrance as his new trainer, but Eddie wasn't the only one who was disappointed with Bowe's performance that night. And the New York Times stated that after his controversial victory over Andrew Golota last summer, Riddick Bowe said he couldn't even go home without hearing about how poorly he had fought. His mother, his nieces and nephews were all there to tell Bowe that he was losing when Golota was disqualified for low blows in the 7th round. Bowe said, she made me feel that big, holding his finger and thumb about an inch apart, talking about the scolding he actually got from his mother. Now, while Bowe needed his new trainer, which he had brought in, Phil Torrance, a great appetite for fighting rather than food would have been better for him. And while Golota was enjoying his newfound fame, as explained by Tim Crovers, who wrote that Golota's people were negotiating a deal with HBO, even though none of the current heavyweight champions are daring or dumb enough to fight him. There is talk of a rematch with Bowe later this year that would net Golota his first $1 million paycheck. In the meantime, Golota is going to Hollywood, reading the role of Slashchev, a Russian mafia goon, in the up-and-coming remake of The Day of the Jackal.
Carruthers then continued to take the mickey out of Andrew in his tongue-in-cheek article by explaining that his lines are as follows. No English. Private here. You go. I say you go. Go now. What? The script sounds a lot like one of his interviews. At a recent lunch with Garanchek and another reporter, Golota restlessly answered inquiries in a similar manner, adding a series of grunts and other guttural mumblings. Finally, after an hour or so, Golota left the table, thus ending a conversation slightly more arduous than spleen removal. At that point, Garanchek turned to his fellow journalist and said sincerely, "Wow, I have never seen Andrew open up like that before." Now, just when Polish-American relations appeared doomed, Golota returned, and he was suddenly, magically, eloquently in his adopted tongue, as if he had crammed bullets, or at least rehearsed a speech while settling the bill. Golota said, "I wanted to tell you that growing up in Poland, I would watch videotapes of Muhammad Ali thinking all the time about becoming the heavyweight champion of the world and living the American dream. Now I guess I am living the dream better than most of you Americans, yes? Now that's a low blow." And Lou Duva explained to the Philadelphia Inquirer the financial ramifications of Golota's disqualification that night at the Garden. He said, those disqualifications cost him $20 million, knocked him out of a contract with HBO worth about that much, and he knew it. Maybe at first he thought he could get away with that stuff, but he knew what was at stake. Now, with everything that had gone on in Madison Square Garden that night, and everything else that followed in the aftermath, Riddick Bowe against Andrew Golota 2 was negotiated and finalised for October the 17th, 1996.
The New York Times confirmed that Bowe, the 29-year-old former heavyweight champion, will get a chance for redemption when he fights Golota, a 28-year-old from Poland, in a rematch December 14 at the Convention Center in Atlantic City, 5 months after their first fight. Now, the scheduled 10-round pay-per-view bout was announced at a Manhattan news conference. Lou Duva correctly concluded, "We all should have had our heads examined." And so, we move into the build-up of this second fight. So the first thing that Lou needed to do was work on, or maybe the only thing that Lou needed to do, was work on Andrew's discipline and demand that he doesn't hit low. And he explained, "We did everything we could during training camp to keep Andrew from hitting low, even going as far as to put a pair of boxing trunks on the bottom half of the heavy bag and made him hit the top half only. But we knew that we were playing with fire by putting him back in the ring. Our hope was that he would listen and he wouldn't pull the same stunt, but there were no guarantees that Andrew would ever do the right thing. The controversy of the first fight meant that the rematch was must-see TV and was placed on pay-per-view. We knew people would tune in to see if Andrew had reformed or if he hadn't learned his lesson from the first fight. And because of his unusual behaviour and impulsive actions, Riddick Bowe's camp actually demanded that he take a drugs test. Now, to be fair, they were well within their rights to assume that maybe drugs were at play in that first fight. Steroids was a drug that they assumed he was on, which do present symptoms that change someone's mood and behaviour, such as feeling irritable and anxious, and they were both symptoms that Andrew clearly suffered in the build-up to the fight and the actual fight.
Golota did not refuse any of the tests. In fact, he passed the 3 drugs tests demanded of him by Team Bowe before their return. Lou Duva wrote on this subject in his book, and this is what he said. "People always asked me if Andrew was on steroids. While I never saw him taking anything strange, there was an instance where I received a troubling call from one of our trainers, Ronnie Shields. We had apartments set up in the cities where we had training camps so as to cut down on the expenses of housing our boxers. We had one place in West Palm Beach, Florida, where Andrew had been staying. Once, after he had been in the apartment, I asked Ronnie to go over and clean up before Fernando Vargas came to town to stay there. Ronnie went into the apartment and found several hypodermic needles all over the apartment and bloody tissues and cotton balls. He refused to clean it up. We had to call someone else in to clean up his mess." Now, for the rematch, Riddick Bowe brought in renowned trainer Mackie Shilstone and a nutritionist to monitor his training and diet. It worked, as a dedicated Riddick Bowe managed to trim himself down, shedding 50 pounds in 8 weeks, and came in 17 pounds lighter than he was in the first fight. Bowe was not overlooking Golota this time. He said, "He embarrassed me and did all the things to me that I should have done to him. I wanted to redeem myself." There was plenty of interest in their rematch. Many tuned in to see if Golota could control himself, and would the Polish heavyweight keep his discipline, and would a slimmer Riddick Bowe return to his form of old? Well, the fight aired on TVKO, HBO's pay-per-view predecessor, with Jim Lampley, Larry Merchant and George Foreman at ringside calling the action.
Hello again, everybody. What we're about to see is a defining moment for two fighters. Riddick Bowe used to be considered the best. Then he lost focus and all his heavyweight titles. There's always new blood in the fight game waiting to devour you. 5 months ago, Andrew Golota came along and nearly dealt Bowe a mortal blow. Golota proved he is a real menace, with heart, with hunger, and with talent. Qualities Bowe must dig deep to rediscover within himself tonight, or risk being counted out of the heavyweight picture for good. Just how much fiber, how much fortitude, and how much fight does Riddick Bowe have left in him? Can he find redemption? Can he rescue his career? Is Golota a fluke, or is he the genuine article? There is unfinished business to attend to because of what happened the first time these two guys tangled.
Yeah, so Riddick Bowe, now 39-1 with 32 KOs, entered first wearing all red with a yellow trim to Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA, while his fans cheered. As the Polish national anthem began to play, Andrew Golota, 28-1 with 25 knockouts, decorated in white with red trim, began his walk to the ring. His supporters, many dressed in red and white, made their presence known while waving the Polish flags as they did in the first fight. Atlantic City and Convention Hall security were evident at ringside, while everyone in the arena was on their feet, waiting in anticipation, wondering what was going to happen. Larry Merchant felt powerful vibes from both fighters and their fans. I've always thought there was kind of a medieval splendour in those ring walks. This is dramatic stuff. And for the second time in 5 months, Brooklyn was about to collide with Warsaw, Poland. Ring announcer Michael Buffer introduced referee Eddie Cotton and the fighters as both men removed their robes. Golota appeared in great shape at 239 pounds, and Bowe too looked in terrific nick, weighing 235 pounds. So into the rematch we go, and I'm going to kick-start with round 1, and the crowd was on their feet, many stomping, chanting and cheering. Lampley too could feel the excitement. This is a live electric crowd, he said. Now from the opening bell, Riddick Bowe looked very lethargic in the ring. All those punishing battles and weight fluctuation looked like it had really taken effect. Larry Merchant actually recalled, it soon became apparent that he was a spent force. The first fight was not just a matter of conditioning, he was an old fighter before he got old. As in the previous fight, Bowe had trouble with landing his jab in the first round, while Golota was able to effectively use his and land nearly twice as many punches.
The action heated up in the second round as Golota fired a straight right hand and then followed it with a crushing left hook that put Bowe to the mat. As Bowe crashed to the canvas, Lampley screamed, "Hard power punches from Golota, Bowe goes down." Still, with 2 minutes to go in the round, Golota went for broke and poured it on. Bowe, hurt, retreated to the ropes as the onslaught continued. Jim Lampley said that he proceeded to hammer Bowe with the most continuous assault of power punches that any heavyweight has ever had to take in a big fight. Somehow, Bowe managed to survive, and with just 30 seconds left in the round. Lampley reflected that all the courage that Riddick had shown against Holyfield in the first fight, here it was again, as he was taking ridiculous punishment all around the ring from pillar to post. Inexplicably, Golota then leaned forward. And guess what? You know what's coming. He deliberately headbutted Riddick Bowe. Many booed as Cotton momentarily halted the action and penalised Golota a point, who now had a self-inflicted cut over his left eye. Despite the foul and the horrific beating, Bowe had a chance to recuperate, and he bounced back to have a solid third round. Into the fourth, and Bowe continued to dig down with every resolve he had in the locker, and even began to dominate the man from Poland. He caught Golota with a sweeping right hand, sending Lampley again into a frenzy. And Golota stumbles. Andrew Golota has never been knocked down, but he will be in a few seconds if he keeps this up. Lampley was right, as Bowe landed a 15-punch combination that sent Golota to the canvas as the first minute of the round came to an end. It was the first time Andrew Golota had been knocked down.
So moving into rounds 4 and 5, and Lampley was loving what he was witnessing. This is rapidly becoming like a Rocky movie, he said. The combination also reopened Golota's cut, and he was forced to finish the final 2 minutes with blood trickling from his left eye. In the final minute of the 4th round, Golota was warned once again for a low blows. Then just seconds later, he went to the bullocks again. Now, while Bowe was actually on one knee and forced to take a 30-second break, Cotton again halted the action and deducted a second point now from Golota. Roger Bloodworth, he just couldn't understand what Golota was playing at. He was obviously in his corner. He said, just disbelief. I couldn't believe that what I was seeing, the same thing again, he said. You can hear Roger actually screaming in Andrew's ear, no more body punches. And Lou was also screaming, uppercuts and go to the head with this guy. It literally visibly looked like he was going in one ear and out the other. And even with 2 points deducted from his score and a knockdown against him, Golota continued his onslaught in the 5th round. He had regrouped and launched a vicious counter-assault at Bowe. He pinned him against the ropes. A right hand sent Bowe reeling again, and Lampley tried to keep up with the ferocious pace. Hard shots by Golota. Bowe is wasted again. That's a knockdown. That's another knockdown. The tide had turned once again as Golota pounded away at Bowe for the remainder of the round. The beating was so bad that it actually prompted Larry Merchant to comment, I gave another 3-point round. I don't know how long he's going to take this. Now, although Bowe was having his ass handed to him, Golota looked to be the worst for wear. He was bleeding from his mouth and his left eye. There was also a cut on his lip, which seemed to go all the way through and into the inside of his mouth. It was a bad one. And Foreman recognised that Bowe was wearing down. And he said, at this point, Riddick Bowe's punches have no steam on them at all.
Moving into round 6 up to 9, the beating by Golota continued in round 6 through till 8. The Bowe corner threatened to stop the fight after the 7th as Bowe seemingly did not have all of his faculties. He was courageously firing back at times, but not enough to warrant the beating he was taking. He showed heart, courage and guts, but surely the writing was on the wall. Golota continued to attack as Lampley yelled, now Golota goes to war in the corner just above us, trying to put Bowe in George Foreman's lap. However, there was always hope because Golota had not kept all of his punches clean during the course of the 3 rounds and was warned by Cotton to stop rabbit punching. He was also given a warning by Lou Duva for throwing punches around Bowe's belt line, another warning he did not listen to. Referee Eddie Cotton recalled, late in the 9th round, he went back to it again, and the last 2 was a combination way below the belt.
When you get to this point of a fight, it's not about what you see outside, it's about what they have inside.
The referee is deciding not to even bring in those low shots now. He's not even talking about them. He's allowing them to throw low if they happen to do it.
Stop punching.
2 exhausted warriors. Bloody, sweaty, hurt. What else is there, George?
Boy, this is the pain.
Semi-conscious. Low blows, and down goes Bowe again.
Yeah, that's it.
And Cotton is not thinking disqualification.
He's calling the fight over.
That's it.
He's calling
thinking disqualification.
He's disqualified Golota again.
He disqualified.
He did disqualify him?
The fight is over. Another disqualification.
That low blow combination came with just seconds left in the 9th and final round. Bowe went crashing to the canvas and Cotton felt he had no choice but to stop the fight. Bowe years later said he was willing to fight hands down, but because he was an idiot, he got himself disqualified because he didn't want to be there. Due to Golota's lack of control, he lost the fight again. He was up on all 3 scorecards, 75-71, 75-73 and 74-72. George Foreman summarised the beating Riddick Bowe took in one short sentence when he said, Riddick Bowe got whipped. As true as that may have been, Andrew Golota again beat himself. Jim Lampley reflected and he said, I felt sad for him. I felt sad for Riddick. I felt sad for us that potentially a glorious event had once again become this strange atrocity.
And nobody from Golota's camp put up an argument, obviously with the disqualification, and Lou Duva said, I couldn't defend him. I wish I could. I can't explain it. I said, Andrew, you're winning the fight. Just get out there and box. What made him do that? I just don't know. Lou also reflected in his book that another disqualification in a fight that he was clearly winning all the judges' scorecards only proved that Golota was a head case. It made all our efforts trying to turn him into a heavyweight world champion feel like a major waste of time. Directly after the fight, Bowe said, I want to fight, but I don't want to fight as hard. I think I will continue to fight. Being a fighter, you're in the hurt business. Everybody gets a turn. The guy is going to get in there and hurt you one day. But he who rises shows determination and heart. Tonight I showed I'm championship material. I believe if I wasn't in shape, Golota would have been able to get me out of there. Hopefully Sunday, Mr. Holyfield gives me another opportunity. But a few minutes later, when Bowe was asked what his mother, Dorothy, thought of the fight, he sounded a lot more reflective. He said, my mother never liked boxing. So the first thing that came out of her face was that she still wants me to retire. I'm going to go home and enjoy the holidays, and the first of the year, I'm going to see what happens and weigh up my options. Well, Lou Duva went through what happened in the dressing room after the fight, in the Golota dressing room that is, and he said, it was a sad scene in the dressing room after the fight. Andrew realised that he had blown it again. We all knew that it was the biggest mistake he had ever made in his career.
Lou continued and said, if he had won the fight, he was looking at making upward of $20 million in future fights on HBO. But that was all down the drain because he couldn't control himself. He was winning both fights easily and tossed it away. Why? I was yelling at him, you could be champion of the world. The only guy stopping you is you. Nobody but you. Andrew started crying like a baby. I stupid. He was banging himself in the head with his hands. He was right. He was stupid. You didn't listen to me. You had the guy out. Yeah, I know, but the referee. Don't tell me about the referee. That was it for me. I had my fill of him. He could have been a great fighter. He could have been a world champion. He could punch and he could take a punch. He didn't want to take it and he didn't want to punch. Also, later that evening, Golota was taken to the hospital for a suspected broken jaw. As he was unable to speak, Lou sat in with Larry Merchant for a post-fight interview, and this is what he recalled. He said, I was still beside myself from the outcome and I couldn't help but being blunt about the situation. So when Larry started his question with, the appearance now is you may have the best heavyweight in the world, and I quickly cut him off and said, if we held the fight in a bar. After the second disqualification against Bowe, boxing writer Michael Katz of the New York Daily News came up with the nickname Foul Pole for Andrew because of all the low blows and fouls throughout his career, and the nickname has stuck ever since. So now we've covered the aftermath of the actual fight, we're going to summarise a little bit about what was happening with Golota. And Lou stuck by Golota even after the second fight debacle, and he said, I should have walked away from Andrew then.
Yeah, and he continued to say, but I couldn't. I still believed he could become a heavyweight champion. He had all the skills and the ability, and I thought I could get him to focus in the ring. I wanted him to become a world champion. Incredibly, Golota was actually named WBC's #1 contender, gaining the championship match against the champion, who was Lennox Lewis, that Bowe had previously wanted prior to his fights with Golota, and it looked like it was going to happen. But he would ultimately lose to Lennox Lewis by a first-round knockout. He then went on to have fights against other named fighters such as Corey Sanders, Tim Witherspoon. He outpointed these guys, by the way, Jesse Ferguson, and then he drew with Lamont Brewster. But he was actually knocked out by Michael Grant, John Ruiz, and Thomas Adamek, and fought in a no contest against, of course, Iron Mike Tyson. Although that was only because Mike actually tested positive for marijuana after the fight. His trainer, because obviously Lou left him by the time he fought Tyson, was actually Al Certo for the Tyson fight. And he was seen trying to put his mouthpiece back in because he quit. He just basically quit the fight, Golota. And this is what Al Certo said. He said, when I was trying to put that mouthpiece in his mouth, I should have shoved it up his ass. I said, Andrew, don't do it to yourself. And he didn't want to know nothing. He just pushed me away. Well, Andrew Golota ended his career with a record of 41 wins, 33 by way of knockout and 9 defeats. After Andrew finally quit boxing, he settled down in Chicago with his wife and daughter. He got into some more legal trouble, including getting arrested for impersonating a police officer. So here's Lou Duva's final thoughts. Lou Duva, a great source for this episode and of course on the side of Andrew Golota. So his final thoughts on Andrew Golota was, I never had a fighter like Andrew. It was a wild ride in Golota's corner, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. He brought some excitement to main events. You never know what was going to happen when he stepped into the ring. And in some ways, that's the beauty of boxing.
So we are going to summarise the end of Riddick Bowe's career. And on April the 30th, 1996, Bowe announced his retirement from boxing at the age of 29, finishing his career with a record of 43 wins, 33 by way of knockout and only 1 defeat. He then decided to join the United States Marine Corps Reserve. Bowe arrived at the Marine Corps Recruit Depot, Paris Island, on February the 10th, 1997. On his first day of recruit training, Bowe discussed leaving the corps with the Marine commanders and quit after 3 days of heavy physical training with his platoon in Paris Island, South Carolina, on February the 21st, 1997. Bowe was convicted of the February 1998 kidnapping of his estranged wife, Judy, and their 5 children. During the kidnap, he stabbed his wife before being captured by the police. He was then sentenced on February the 29th, 2000 and served 17 months in federal prison. Following his release, he then dabbled in kickboxing and some pro wrestling, and in 2015, he was inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame. Now, of course, we are going to do a career profile on Riddick Bowe at some point, so we are going to leave some of the tales of Riddick Bowe for that, but also for the darker side of boxing. As you heard in that last sentence there about certain incidents that he was involved in, we are going to save some of those stories for that particular show. But that brings an end to the story and the tale of Riddick Bowe and Andrew Golota, and we are now just going to have a few moments to really reflect upon this tale. And it was completely contrasting from what we have done previously with the Legendary Nights podcast. When we put this episode together and it came in the list for this season, you probably thought, well, why would you want to cover something like this? Because it wasn't essentially a great fight or a legendary night or a legendary fight, so to speak. But it actually originally appeared in the HBO Legendary Nights documentary. It was one of the tales that they did. And it also felt right to do this tale because it really has, with age, brought so many new stories to the forefront. And we wanted to really tell the true story of what went on and how someone with so much potential ended up throwing it all away in the space of 2 fights, back-to-back, in fights that he was winning. Andrew Golota could have been considered the greatest Polish fighter of all time if he would have done what he needed to do in the fight and not throw them foul punches in, them low blows and rabbit punches, and not put himself into that position. We could be talking about him now as one of the greatest Polish fighters of all time. Polish fans might consider him to be one of the greatest fighters of all time in their country, but I think he squandered some great opportunities. And whilst he still got a shot at the WBC title and was knocked out by Lennox Lewis, and he fought Mike Tyson, of course, I think it was obvious by this point that his head was never there. Was his head ever there in the sport, Johnston? I mean, we've done some stories on this in this episode, and it kind of seems that when the going really got tough for him in there, it was like he wanted to turn his back and just say, nope, I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah, I think that is probably the whole point of the Golota story, when you sort of, obviously Lou was a huge influence in giving us a picture on him, and obviously there were other articles that we also used to put into this, and I think the general consensus is that when it got a bit tough, got a bit dirty, he wasn't interested. Albeit that second fight is, do you know what? It's a really good fight, to be fair. And I'm sort of with Lampley as well. Like, he felt sorry for the fighters, he felt sorry for them, and he felt sorry for everyone else, because he by him being so stupid, he did rob that night, because he shouldn't have been disqualified, and he could have gone on to win that fight. And even in the first one, I mean, he should have won that as well. Second fight I felt was probably a bit better than the first, but for Golota especially. But then seeing Bowe come back as well, they had sort of a to and fro to it, but he just kept letting himself down. And no matter what they said to him, I mean, even putting a pair of boxer shorts on a punching bag, you can actually see the footage as well. And he stuck it on, he's like, do not hit anywhere below this belt. It doesn't matter. And obviously, you know, the faults of steroid use came into play for Bowe, and it also come into play again for the Lewis fight as well. And every time he did pass those tests, the story there from Duva, you do wonder if there was some sort of drug use, because of his just, you can't be that stupid. I don't know. Is it stupidity, or is it as literally that? You know, the going gets tough, and he's like, I can't do it no more. So I'd rather get disqualified than get beaten by a knockout. But yet, you look at Lewis, he gets knocked out by him, and then he quits against Tyson. There's something not quite right with Golota, and I think that's pretty clear. And then obviously thinking of Bowe, I mean, there was a discussion at the end of Legendary Night's documentary, actually, and they do say, like, when you hear Holyfield speaking after the first Holyfield fight that he wins, and then you hear him speaking at the second Golota fight, and the difference in his speech is actually quite considerable. And they do believe that there was definitely, you know, the punishment he had taken in the ring really affected him. And I know we pretty much said it as well when at the start of the round with the second fight with Larry Merchant, when he did say that he was a spent force and that he was an old fighter before he got old. And he really was. I mean, you see the speech element there, the difference clearly was being affected, punch drunk, absolutely, CT, whatever you want to look at it. And then what then went on after, which we're definitely going to do in a dark side of boxing episode, but what happened to him after with the kidnaps and stuff like that and going to prison. Just got two crazy fighters that ended up having these fights, and the irony of it is they were crazy themselves, the fights in particular. It was a crazy story, absolutely crazy, but in a way, I think it sums up boxing quite perfectly, to be honest with you.
It really does, doesn't it? Like how things can change so quickly and so dramatically, and that's exactly what happened within these fights. Just when you think it was going one way, it completely did a U-turn and went the other way, and that's why it's so memorable and so legendary in some ways. It's because of its infamy in the sport, and you couldn't believe this was going on. A guy was literally on the cusp of glory and earning himself potentially $20 million plus, and he just throws it all away. I mean, we're never going to know what was going through Andrew Golota's mind at this moment in time in his life, but it was quite obvious from the stories of people surrounding him, which we covered in this story, that he obviously had some issues going on that prevented him from getting to that next level of being a professional boxer and obviously a human being at the time as well. And I don't really know what Andrew Golota does now, and probably one day at some point in the future it'll be definitely a talking point for us. It maybe will be a career profile at some point down the line, but just bringing Andrew Golota to our podcast network and covering his story for this episode has been quite entertaining, in the sense that I've got to learn a little bit more about what was going on around the time with him. And I remember the fights, and I just remember thinking this crazy foreign guy was just, what is he doing? Why does he keep throwing them punches down below? And you look back on it now and you think, wow, this is just one of them moments where he had everything in the palm of his hand and he literally just chucked it away. And for Riddick Bowe, like you rightly pointed out, it was considerable, the speech difference with the Holyfield fight to the Golota fight, and it's quite obvious that he suffered from sort of post-traumatic injuries as a result of his boxing career. And if you see him now, he's even more debilitated. I've seen him being pushed around in a wheelchair at times as well, and you know, it's quite sad to see that a guy that gave us so much in his career is now in this position. He is getting around. He does go to events. He does talk. He's not like he's completely lost his speech, but is a far cry from where he was. The Riddick Bowe that you would have known growing up in the 1990s is not the same Riddick Bowe anymore, and you can tell the effect that boxing's had on him, and it is that cliche saying of boxing has taken more from Riddick Bowe than I think Riddick Bowe was able to take from the sport. That's my opinion on where Riddick Bowe went with this, but I still think he is one of the great fighters of that era. He's still one of the great heavyweights of that era, and he did solidify his legacy with his fights with Evander Holyfield. And I'm sure when we do more things on Riddick Bowe, we'll get to learn more stories surrounding his life, his childhood, between these big fights, and more stories surrounding these. So I am excited to cover Riddick Bowe after doing this particular episode and already doing the Tale of Bowe and Holyfield. So it'll be really good to cover something on Bowe. And I think Golota as well, probably understanding more about his origins will be really interesting. We did bring some of it to this episode, but I'm sure there's more that we haven't uncovered yet, which we'll eventually will in the future. Johnston, final words from you on the tale of Riddick Bowe and Andrew Golota.
Well, I mean, we haven't even mentioned the fact there was a crazy riot. I mean, the brawl in Madison Square Garden was just insane. I mean, I've never seen anything like that, really. It was like something from just WWE that just went over the top and then moved out into the crowd. And it was just, I don't think I've ever seen anything like that. I mean, wow, what on earth was going on there? And whether it was I think, so who was it, Mark Kriegel sort of said he related it to football hooliganism and football riots. I suppose, it probably is about that, really. And yeah, just how these two, it was almost inevitable they were going to stumble across each other at some point. But just every fight they were having, it just seemed to be one thing after the other, whether it be with Bowe, with Elijah, when he starts kicking him, turns into a kickboxing match. You got the Fan Man as well. And then obviously you got the press conference brawl where he starts punching his opponent. And then you have Golota, where he has a situation where he headbutts somebody. And the best one for me, Sean, and I felt when we was doing this, I absolutely fell to the pieces because it was just brilliant in the biting situation. And they just sort of said, Andrew, did you bite the guy? And Andrew looks at us and says, I had to bite the motherfucker. That just got me. Absolutely. I was in bits after we were sort of reading through that because I could just see it now. I had to bite the motherfucker. I think that sums up Andrew Golota in a nutshell.
Well, it's been a great tale, and of course, we've gone through some of these infamous moments on one of our episodes, The Best Boxing Brawls, one that we did a couple of years ago. I mean, this was one of these moments, the Riddick Bowe, Larry Donald moment, of course, the infamous brawls that we've covered in the show, so please do go and look back and listen to that particular episode from a few years ago. However, we have come to an end of this particular episode, and if you've enjoyed it, please do let us know on social media. You can tweet us at Legend Night Pod or at BTR Boxing Pod on Twitter. If you're listening on Spotify, leave a comment below the episode to let us know what you think. If you're listening on YouTube, please leave a comment below there to let us know what you think. Any thoughts and feelings around this whole tale is always appreciated. And if you have listened through the Patreon app and the private podcast feed, we hope you've enjoyed having early access to it and ad-free access to it, of course. If you are not a patron and want to check out what we do over there, check us out at patreon.com/BTR Boxing Podcast. And as we said, we do ad-free versions of all the episodes, and we do the series-based content earlier for everybody else who's a patron. So do go and check that out at patreon.com. For everybody else, please like and share the videos that you see on social media. Make sure you like and share the posts that go out on all the platforms. It really is appreciated when you put that out there and support us in that way as well. But we do hope you have enjoyed this episode, episode 3 on season 4 of the Legendary Night podcast, The Tale of Riddick Bowe and Andrew Golota.